This week on Cosmic Sponge, we learned that the Obama Presidential Library may be a treasure trove of real UFO documentation. Jimmy has a story about a veteran scientist of Skinwalker Ranch who discovers a peeping Tom outside his Virginia home, one with glowing eyes and claws. For our main topic, we explore the explosive phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion. And finally, you'll get to hear me brushing up on my Latin. Pipere sapore la cogoni della morte della Segori Contessa Cornelia Zangari ne bande cesnete.
Demons be gone!
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we discuss UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I'm Stephen Hall.
And I am Jimmy Cook.
Tonight we are exploring a hot topic, you could say. We are looking at the phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion. Yes, folks, we are looking at incidents in history where people burst into flames for no apparent reason.
Let me get my oven mitts.
Is it real? Does it exist? Does the scientific community poo-poo this along with all the other stuff we talk about? Well, we're about to find out. But first, before we get into that, Jimmy, what you been up to this week?
Werewolves.
Werewolves?
Werewolves.
That sounds interesting.
You know, they have this place called Skinwalker Ranch. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, it seems like maybe somewhere.
Maybe somewhere in the back of your mind.
You don't do a podcast like this for a year and not hear Skinwalker Ranch.
That's right. I was looking through the latest news items, and I found this article that was talking about a werewolf located in Virginia.
That's not too far from me.
Right. And it was peeking into the home of one of the men who had investigated Skinwalker Ranch.
Okay, I was wondering where the connection was because Skinwalker Ranch, last time I heard, was nowhere close to Virginia.
That's right.
What's it in Arizona or something? Utah? It's out west. One of those sandy states.
I think it's in the 56th state, the sandy state.
Where is Skinwalker Ranch?
Let's look it up.
I'm gonna have to look it up.
Skinwalker Ranch. Let's see. It says it's in a sandy state. It's in Ballard. It's southeast of Ballard, Utah.
Utah.
Yeah.
That was my next guess.
It's a sandy state.
Yeah, not a lot of grass. At least not whenever I see pictures of it.
So the United States government not only has secret files on aliens and UFOs, but apparently also on paranormal activity and cryptozoology. One such story was told recently by retired Defense and Intelligence Officer James Lakatsky and retired CIA Operations Officer Jim Semivan, both who worked on the secret Pentagon program investigating UFOs. After the Nimitz investigation, the sailor and two Marines were sent to a Utah property known as Skinwalker Ranch, where Bigelow, the owner, had funded his own private research of UFO and paranormal activity over the previous decade. Skinwalker Ranch sits on just 500 acres of steep land near the town of Ballard in northeastern Utah. There you go. It has long been alleged epicenter of strange happenings dating back to the tales of the Native American Ute tribe and the Navajo people who believe in malevolent witches called skinwalkers who can transform into animal-like creatures. The three active duty service members whose identities have been concealed by the researchers and the Defense Department allegedly witnessed a black void on the land that filled them with fear. Lakatsky and Kellier claim the men experienced paranormal activity after leaving the ranch and returning to homes in Washington, D.C., such as orbs, dark figures in bedrooms at night, and strange voices. The wife and two teen children of the sailor who investigated the Nimitz incident claimed to have seen a wolf-like creature that walked on two hind legs staring into their Virginia home on two occasions. Military.com asked the Pentagon whether it could confirm the paranormal research. No, was the one-word response from Sue Gao, the department spokesperson on UFOs.
Well, that's because they asked the person in charge of UFOs. Why didn't they ask the person in charge of werewolves? They just asked the wrong person in the government. I mean, the government's not just one person. They don't know everything, right?
Right. They should have went over to the werewolf desk. They went over to the UFO desk.
Exactly. What are you doing at the UFO desk?
That's what the person said. They should have said more than just no. They should have been helpful. No. Go over to the werewolf desk.
Here, let me transfer you, right? Or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. I got a pretty neat one here. Do you remember a few years ago when Barack Obama was president? I'm sure you remember that. But whenever, of course, in your case, I don't know.
What are you getting at here? I'm nervous.
Nothing. Anyway, during the Obama administration, they were asked repeatedly about UFOs and things like that. They always just give this like form response. There was never any kind of like, oh, maybe or whatever. I mean, they just shut it down. It would always be a form letter if anybody wrote to the White House about UFOs or whatever, that there's no UFOs, no flying saucers. But then, of course, we realized since the Nimitz encounters and all this stuff came to light in the past couple of years with ATIP and some of those things that Barack Obama has since in a few interviews alluded to maybe there's something out there, right? John Greenwald, who runs the Black Vault, and anybody that's into UFO research, I mean, his site is an absolute treasure trove. This is the individual that started filing these FOIA requests back when he was 15 or 16 years old, and he has probably millions of documents. I don't know how many documents he has, but a lot of them are on UFOs, but he has a lot of other things too of interest, FBI files and a lot of things. But anyway, he filed a FOIA request with the Obama Presidential Library, and he received this letter in response. Now, this comes from a tweet from John Greenwald. The letter is in response to your FOIA request dated January 23rd, 2022 for access to Barack Obama's presidential records pertaining to documents and communications about the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, that's ATIP, and photos and videos of unidentified flying objects, unidentified aerial phenomenon, and the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. It goes into some little details about the 1978 Presidential Records Act. And then it says, we have performed a search of our collection for the presidential records related to your request and have identified approximately 3,440 pages and 26,271 electronic files of potentially responsive records that must be processed in order to respond to your request. Please keep that in mind that these tools are an estimate and that all material processed may not be applicable to your specific topic. So it sounds like, oh my God, they got all kinds of stuff, right?
Well.
But then he goes on to say in another tweet that they also informed him that it would take an estimated 16 years to fulfill his FOIA request.
It's probably a bunch of stuff like, Lou, this is President Obama. Just got back to the Oval Office. When we were at Subway together, I think you got my tuna sub. I think I have your meatball sub. Could you please, Lou, get over here right away with my tuna sub?
And he's probably like,
and then Lou's
responding, I'll send it right over.
Yeah, I'll send it right over.
No, he says I'll send it right over on the what is it? The T3 triangular ship,
TRB-3.
Yeah,
I'll send it. It'll be right. It'll be there yesterday. It's
right.
A time-traveling triangle.
Pretty interesting there that they said they had so much documentation, but if you read it again, at first it sounds like it's a ton, but then it also sounds like, oh, they need to sort through all that. A lot of it could potentially not be related to the subject you're particularly interested in. Only going to take 16 years. Hopefully our podcast will still be going, and folks, I'll follow up on that when John Greenwald finally receives his FOIA request, if he chooses to publish it.
Or he'll think he's following up on it because Steve will be sitting in an old folks' home screaming at a 1975 black and white television set with a coat hanger hanging out the top of it.
Right. Tinfoil wrapped around the coat hanger. Don't forget that. That's the most important part.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge.
Welcome to
whatever this is.
Welcome.
Welcome come.
Bunch of other old people saying, shut up.
Shut up. I'm trying to eat my greens. So anyway,
I guess we'll move on to tonight's topic. Folks, remember, before we do that, I would like to remind everyone, please rate and review the podcast. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Looks like we've had quite a few new listeners lately, and we're seeing a lot of downloads of the older episodes, which is great. You can support the show now on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Cosmic Sponge. If you do so at every level, we have 3 different levels, and every level that you join, you will gain access to another show that we do called Weird Wonders, which is just a continuation basically of what you just heard. So if you like this show and you want to support this show, you can get more of the Sponge on the Weird Wonder show. And you can also access that from our webpage. If you go to CosmicSponge.com, look up in the upper right-hand corner, there is a little coffee cup icon, and you can click on that to support the show with a one-time gift, or you can go to looks like a little chain link or something. I don't know. It's right beside that, to the right of it. Click on that, and it'll take you right to the Patreon site, and then you can choose your level of support from there. And to everyone that supports us, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone that is listening. So on to tonight's topic.
Say it.
Tonight's episode is on spontaneous human combustion, SHC. I guess you could say it's an explosive topic. And Jimmy, I think you've done a little legwork on this one. Why don't you get us kicked off on spontaneous human combustion?
In the novel Bleak House by Charles Dickens, one of the characters, Mr. Crook, runs a rag and bone shop just behind the chancery. He's a miserable, illiterate old man, sautéed in gin, sharing his dumpy pawn shop with a house cat named Asshole. Okay, I don't really remember the cat's exact name, but I do remember it was gray and trained to attack on command, and it was an asshole. At one point in the novel, Mr. Crook goes up in flames, an apparent victim of spontaneous combustion, a suspected side effect of both his prolific drinking and spiteful disposition. Now, upon reading the manner of Crook's demise, Charles was approached by his good friend and a man of science, Mr. George Lewis, who insisted that spontaneous combustion was not a thing at all, and by including it in his latest story, as popular as Dickens was, he might have well inflamed the public to wield marshmallow-laden sticks around the family's favorite drunk uncle at all the family get-togethers, increasing the potential of someone losing an eye, or worse, a populace subjected to the consumption of cold, hard-shelled marshmallows of sadness. Dickens, undeterred, doubled down, citing upwards to 30 known cases of spontaneous combustion recorded in the medical textbook, The Anatomy of Drunkenness, by Glaswegian surgeon Robert Macnish, first published in 1827. While 30 cases may seem compelling at first glance, it would be prudent to note it was published in 1827, and that germs wouldn't be discovered until the later half of the 19th century. Mercury and cocaine-laden cola was still the favorite cure-all of the time, and as little as a scratch on the forearm would lead to a diagnosis of, "I'm sorry to inform you that you only have 2 weeks to live, son. Now drink this mercury coca cocktail and pay Doug on the way out." Spontaneous combustion was also used, to some degree, to bring about prohibition, as alcohol was considered a primary ingredient in the process of bursting into a Roman candle. What better way to get people on board than to use, "You might explode if you drink that," as a warning? Jumping forward to more recent accounts, however, does produce a variety of cases which puzzle experts even today, and suggest there may be something beyond our current understanding of science and medicine required to explain deaths attributed to spontaneous combustion. In the cases we look at tonight, we examine several of the more popular incidents and then the factors necessary to produce the horrific pile of ash and bone, or in some cases little more than a greasy smudge on a drum throne. Cases like Spinal Tap's third drummer, Peter James Bond, the victim of a violent, spontaneous combustion death, occurring on stage during a jazz festival in front of a semi-active crowd of almost a dozen concert goers. Needless to say, I'm taking a break from wine and jazz festivals, at least until we get to the bottom of this mystery, and hopefully soon, like by the end of this episode. Steve?
Yeah, and at the end of the movie, their current drummer, I think, explodes, too.
Yeah, it's a dangerous job to be a drummer for Spinal Tap.
Yeah. Peter James Bond. Stumpy Joe.
Stumpy Joe.
He died in a bizarre gardening accident.
So, who's our first case we want to tackle tonight?
Well, it's kind of tough to choose. There's some good ones out there. We definitely don't have time to look at all of them. But one thing I wanted to talk about, there is a 1995 book called Ablaze by Larry E. Arnold. He is the director of Parascience International. In his book, he wrote that there had been about 200 cited reports of spontaneous human combustion worldwide over a period of around 300 years. In 1998, the British Medical Journal, in an article by L.A. Perry, cited an 1823 published book, Medical Jurisprudence, which stated that commonalities among recorded cases of spontaneous human combustion included the following characteristics. Number 1, the victims are chronic alcoholics. Number 2, they are usually elderly females. Number 3, the body has not burned spontaneously, but some lighted substance has come into contact with it. The hands and feet usually fall off. The fire has caused very little damage to combustible things in contact with the body. And finally, the combustion of the body has left a residue of greasy and fetid ashes, very offensive in odor. The Victorian area physicians and writers believed spontaneous human combustion was a result of alcoholism. That's not necessarily the case. I'm going to talk about one from 1982. This is the case of Jeannie Saffin. Jeannie Saffin was born in Edmonton, London. She had birth defects that led to mental handicaps, which reduced her abilities to those of a child. She was 61 years old. On September 15th, 1982, she was at her family's home in Edmonton with her father, Jack, and her brother-in-law, Don Carroll. Jeannie was sitting with her father in the kitchen. Jack Saffron was looking away from Jeannie when his attention was drawn to his daughter as she was suddenly on fire. Jack Saffron and his son-in-law, Don Carroll, put out the fire using water from the kitchen and then called for an ambulance. Jeannie was treated en route to the hospital by paramedics, admitted to North Middlesex Hospital, and then transferred to the burn unit at Mount Vernon Hospital, where she was treated until her death caused by bronchopneumonia due to burns 8 days after the original fire and injury. Her relatives suggested at the inquest that her death could have been the case of spontaneous human combustion. But the coroner, Dr. John Burton, said there was no such thing and gave an open verdict. But Jack Saffin's son-in-law, Don, who was in the home at the time of the fire, he stated that Jeannie had flames coming from her mouth and made roaring noises like a dragon. Both Carol and Jack Saffron have repeatedly claimed that prior to Jeannie being lit aflame, there was no source of ignition in the kitchen except the pilot light on the gas stove. Carol also states that Jeannie's clothes were unburned and there was no smoke damage to the kitchen. She was sitting at the kitchen table, burst into flames, and literally had fire shooting out of her mouth. Now, just real quick, I'll follow up with some of the debunking statements on this particular case. One of the statements was she was burned inside her unburned clothes. However, later research noted by Joe Nickel suggested Saffron's clothes were burned. In a written statement given at the time of the death, Carol stated that Saffron's clothes were severely burned and she was wearing a cardigan sweater and it actually melted on her. Also, police reports indicated that upon their arrival, the constables witnessed Jeannie's clothing burning and removed it after putting out the flames. So when they said there was no source of flames, however, investigators did note that her father smoked a pipe. Some people suggested that perhaps an ash or a cinder came out of her father's pipe and landed on her clothing or inside her clothing. They said mostly what was burned was her nylon she had burned and melted nylon on her, like her stockings and I guess her sweater. Mm-hmm. And so all of her burns were like from her stomach and her legs and things like that. So who knows on that? But on the other hand, the witnesses said that there was literally fire shooting from her mouth and she was roaring like a dragon.
Well, I did see this case, and the fire coming out of the mouth, They said that the back of her throat wasn't burned, but the sides were, and that was probably attributed to hyperventilating in response to being caught on fire, that she was freaking out and started hyperventilating, and that gave the appearance of her breathing fire because she's sucking air in and then blowing it out, sucking it in and blowing it out.
Like the smoke and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they claim literally flames came out of her mouth.
Well, if she's sucking them in and then blowing it back out, it might look
blowing
like
the flames in and out. I got
you.
you.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a strange one, but not the strangest. One reason I wanted to start with this one was because this is a case where a person was not an alcoholic. And there seems to be this common thread. And again, I also think it seems that a lot of sources are that people were alcoholics, that they've been drinking heavily or what have you. And as we'll see, there's other cases like that where people were drinking heavily. And so maybe it is a contributing factor. I don't know.
Now, one of the more incredible spontaneous combustion stories, or maybe the first in modern history going back to the 50s up till now, occurred roughly 8 a.m. on July the 2nd, 1951. Reeser's landlady, this is the story of Mary Reeser. Reeser's landlady, Pansy Carpenter, arrived at Reeser's apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida. She had a telegram with her. I think the telegram was informing her that they were going to put the fire alarms in the following week.
Maybe they were her lab reports and found out that she's 3/4 acetone or something.
Yeah, exactly. You have a methane buildup in your intestines. You may want to stay away from any lighted candles.
Open flames.
Stay away from open flames. Okay,
we shouldn't be.
This is terrible. This is horrible. The landlady tries the door, and she found that the metal doorknob to be uncomfortably warm to the touch, so she calls the police. Reeser's remains, which were largely ashes, were found amongst the remains of the chair in which she'd been sitting. Only part of her left foot, which was wearing a slipper, and her backbone remained, along with her skull. Plastic household objects at a distance from the seat of the fire were soft and had lost their shape to some degree. While Reeser's skull had survived, it was found amongst the ashes, but it was about the size. It had shrunken quite a bit, and in a flourish in all the newspapers, they said it had shrunken to the size of a teacup.
Yeah, strange.
Yeah. I wonder why that happens. I'm sure there's a good reason for that, but like a scientific reason for that.
And I read another case where they said that the skull had shrunken like that. I don't know. Is that something common in fires?
I don't know. I looked for it, but I didn't look terribly hard. I assume that the skull itself, like bones, contain marrow and other materials that may have water in them. And if that water gets removed, maybe the skull shrinks. Anyway, look that up while we're doing this, and I'll move on to the rest of the story. Now, Mary Reeser was a smoker, and she had been smoking that evening, and the assumption was that the cigarette had dropped onto her lap. She had burned based on what they're calling the Wick Effect. And this is where the clothing gets ignited, the body starts burning, and you have the fat in the body because Mary Reeser's was overweight. And once that fat starts burning, then you get this slow burn that can get quite hot. And then over time, they just disintegrate, leaving the extremities behind. Now, this would assume that Mary had either passed away or she was sleeping really hard. And she was known to be a user of sleeping pills.
Yeah.
They hypothesized she'd fallen unconscious while smoking, set fire to her nightclothes, and once the body started to burn, it just went, baby.
Yeah, but it's still pretty strange because when you think about even a crematorium, look at the temperatures that they incinerate bodies at and the difficulty of burning a body to ashes. The human body's mostly made up of liquid and it's not flammable in general, right?
Right.
Even if somebody did catch their clothes on fire, usually they just get third-degree burns. I'm not saying you can't die from it, but for someone's body to burn to ash, and then the strangeness in her case where there's furniture in the room that didn't burn, it didn't burn into the floor. She burned so hot in order to, her body's reduced to ashes. Why is nothing else burned around them? Or very little burned around the victims? And by the way, I looked for, just briefly, the only real reference to the skulls shrinking are spontaneous human combustion.
I was looking at what it would take to burn bones to ash. And this was interesting, if a little ghoulish. When crematoriums operate, they burn the bodies down. They burn them down to bone fragments. And then once they collect all of the remains, they then crush those bones down into a powder after the burning has taken effect. In this case, there was nothing but ash left for the most part.
Right. That's what's strange about some of these cases. I'm not so sure about the woman I started with. She didn't burn down to ashes. But now this is Miss Reeser, a very strange case indeed.
Yeah, the temperatures required range between 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
And you would think of something burning at that kind of temperature inside that room to incinerate her would have caught the whole building on fire. You know, and as far as her smoking, come on, it was the 1950s. I mean, 5-year-old kids smoked in the 1950s. I mean,
what's that kid over there smoking with that dog? Everybody smoked. It's 1950s. Bunch of Wawa walking over there with his oxygen tank. Smoked too much as a pup.
On that particular case, what do you have in the way? I mean, what is out there as far as skeptics? What do they say about this? The ones that don't believe in this particular phenomenon.
Well, they think it was, she was incinerated by the Wick Effect. And that's what the FBI eventually said, that she was a regular user of sleeping pills. They hypothesized that she'd fallen unconscious while smoking, set fire to her night clothes, because in the 1950s, clothing was like wearing a coat of gasoline. And and it just started her body burning. And because she was fat, the fat melted to a liquid, and then that liquid would continue to burn for hours and hours and hours.
Just kind of smolder.
Just smoldering. It's like, and they did an experiment in the 1990s, I think 92, where they being, let me see if I have this.
But let's look at another case while you're looking that one up. This is one of the earliest, if not the earliest case that we know of, at least pretty extensively recorded, of spontaneous human combustion. And this is Countess Cornelia Zangari. According to the 1745 issue by the correspondent Paul Rowley, who translated for the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, a 1731 study by the Veronese historian Bocconi. Oh my God, I can't read all that. It's all Latin.
Public school education, eh?
Well, I could, but nobody wants to hear me go. Pipere suppora la cogoni della morte della Segori Contessa Cornelia Zangari ne bande cesnete.
Demons be gone!
Which means opinion on the case of death of Lady Countess Cornelia Zangari.
Ooh, you speak fancy.
During her last dinner, the 66-year-old Countess was dull and heavy. Some accounts report that the Countess was a brandy drinker and that she used to sprinkle camphorated brandy on her body to relieve physical pain. The maid accompanied her to her room and spent 2 hours there chatting and praying. The maid left her mistress already asleep. The next day, when she did not get up at her usual time, she went to wake her, the maid did, and found the remains of the Countess. The room was full of soot. The body of the Countess had been reduced to a pile of ashes that was little more than 3 feet, 3 inches from the bed. Although her lower legs below the knee, 3 fingers in front of her skull were relatively intact. The bed and the rest of the furniture had not been affected by the fire, but were covered by a greasy and smelly layer. On the floor there was an oil lamp covered with ashes, but without oil. The way the sheets were found seemed to indicate that the Countess had risen at some point during the night for the incident. Here's the actual account out of the...
Okay, let's hear it.
Out of the journal. The Countess Cornelia Bandy, in the 62nd year of her age, was all day as well as she used to be, but at night was observed when at supper dull and heavy. She retired, was put to bed, where she passed 3 hours and more in familiar discourses with her maid, and in some prayers. At last, falling asleep, the door was shut. In the morning, the maid, taking notice that her mistress did not awake at the usual hour, went to the bedchamber and called her, but not being answered, doubting of some ill accident, opened the window and saw the corpse of her mistress in this deplorable condition. 4 feet distance from the bed, there was a heap of ashes, 2 legs untouched from foot to knee, with their stockings on. Between them was the lady's head, whose brains, half of the back part of the skull, and whole chin were burnt to ashes, amongst which were found 3 fingers blackened. All the rest was ashes, which had this particular quality, that they left in the hand when taking up a greasy and stinking moisture. The air in the room observed cumbered with soot floating in it, a small oil lamp on the floor covered with ashes, but no oil in it. 2 candles in candlesticks upon a table stood upright. The cotton was left in both, but the tallow was gone and vanished. Somewhat of moisture was about the feet of the candlesticks. The bed received no damage. The blankets and sheets were only raised on one side, as when a person rises up from it or goes in. The whole furniture, as well as the bed, was spread over with moist ash-colored soot, which had penetrated into the chest of drawers, even to foul the linens. Nay, the soot was also gone into a neighboring kitchen, and hung on the walls, movables, aid utensils of it. From the pantry, a piece of bread covered with that soot and brown black was given to several dogs, all of which refused to eat it. In the room above it was moreover taken notice that the lower part of the windows trickled down a greasy, loathsome yellow liquor, and thereabout smelled like a stink without knowing of what, and saw the soot fly around. It was remarkable that the floor of the chamber was so thick smeared with a gluish moisture that it could not be taken off, and the stink spread more and more through the other chambers.
Well, that wordsmith has got me exhausted. So let me get this straight. Some old broad hopped up on bad brandy and who liked to slather herself with whale oil. It goes up in flames in the middle of the night. And she probably wears like jewelry made out of flint. So that's dangly that she's afraid to get stolen.
Yeah, but I guess it got really hot in there because I don't know if you heard that one part where it said the candles had melted down, like the wicks were still there.
Yeah, that's weird. The wicks are still there, but the wax is gone, right?
Just melted away. Strange.
Could be a poltergeist.
I don't know. I mean, she did like to put brandy on her skin whenever joints.
Oh, it was brandy. I thought it was whale oil or something like that. You know, she's just... And then she drinks the brandy and she pours it on herself. And then she smokes.
Didn't say anything about smoking.
Oh, you know all these old countesses smoke. They do in the movies. They got those long cigarettes.
I don't know, man. Tobacco may have not been a thing then in Italy.
I got something even crazier than that and more recent that made me rethink spontaneous combustion entirely.
You mean you rethought it out?
Yeah. I mean, the Wick Effect sounds logical to me. It's probably something like that until this story came up. Frank Baker, the year's 1995, June. Decorated Vietnam veteran Frank Baker, along with his friend Peter Wiley, or maybe it's Willie, Peter Willie.
Well, it's Wile E. Coyote.
That's right, was preparing for a fishing derby which would take place the following day. When without...
Wait. A what derby?
Fishing.
Fishing. Oh.
Fishing. What did you think I said?
Pitching.
No, fishing. Like fishies, the things that are in the water with the eyes on the side of the heads.
Fishing derby?
Fishing derby. You've been to a fishing derby, haven't you?
No, I've been to fishing tournaments.
No, they call them derbies up here. It's
okay.
For little kids
catching
fish.
Who calls it a derby?
They did. Frank called it a derby.
I mean, where's this at? Is this in like Ireland or something?
No, this is up in Vermont.
Oh, well.
Oh, well. What do you got to say about my folks in Vermont? I love my peeps in Vermont. Come on.
Well, it's kind of like, I don't know.
It's a northern versus southern thing, isn't it? You're going to give my northern brethren a rough time, aren't you? I could see it in your eyes. Okay, a fishing tournament, which would take place
derby.
Fishing derby. Which would
right
take
after the soapbox tournament.
Okay. Leave my peeps alone, jackass. All right. would take the place the following day when, without warning, this is the important part I've been trying to get to this whole time. You give me grief about the Derby. Without warning, can you guess what happened to Frank?
He burst into flames.
He burst into flames. That's exactly what I wrote. Now, his buddy Peter sitting right there watching this and managed to extinguish the flames and get Frank to a hospital. Upon examination, the doctor concluded that the fire burned from the inside out.
Ooh.
At the time of the incident, no open flames were anywhere in the room, which could have caused an ignition of a shut up. Ignition of a fire anywhere in the vicinity of Frank. By all appearances, this is a case of partial human spontaneous combustion with no explanation provided.
What happened to Frank? Did he die?
No. He was okay. It was partial. He didn't. Only part of him went to ash. No, so he's fine. He got out of the hospital and everything. They put the flames out pretty quick.
What did he think happened?
He thought he spontaneously combusted.
I have a really important. He
thought, man.
I want to know what he had for lunch that day. Did he have like Mexican or something? I mean,
I don't know. I should have laid off the hot sauce. That's probably what he's thinking. Says, I thought I'd do the hot sauce today because I'm going to be at the Derby tomorrow.
The Derby.
Catch myself some fish at the Derby.
When I hear Derby, I think of like one of those little hats, like his bowler hat,
Oh, I got you. I think you have to wear those while you're fishing. That's what.
that's what I'm actually in my mind.
They're all wearing. Everybody's wearing one of those little hats.
Yeah, in my mind, they're fishing on boats and they're all like really sitting straight upright and they have those little hats on. Well, I've got one here that's the most recent one that I'm aware of. December 22nd, 2010. Have you seen this one?
Oh, it sounds familiar. I think I did. Is that the fire juggler one? Guy juggles fire and bottles filled with gasoline? That guy?
No.
No?
No. December 22nd, 2010. So Michael Faraday, a 76-year-old man who lived in Clareview Park, Ballybane, Galway, that's in Ireland. In the early hours of the December 22nd, 2010, Faraday's neighbor, Mr. Mannon, was awakened by the sound of his smoke alarm. Mannion went outside to find heavy smoke coming from Faraday's house. Getting no answer from Faraday's house, he roused local residents, and the fire brigade was called. Faraday's home was searched by forensics experts from the police and the fire service. His body had been found lying on his back with his head closest to an open fireplace. The fire had been entirely confined to the sitting room, and the only damage found was to the totally burnt bodies. His neighbor hears the smoke alarm going off, calls the police, calls the fire department, and when they get in there, they find literally like just ashes. His body is totally burnt. The fire had been entirely contained in the sitting room, and the only damage found was to the totally burned body and some damage to the ceiling above and the floor below. No trace of any accelerants were found, and there was nothing to suggest any kind of foul play. Assistant Chief Fire Officer Jerry O'Malley told the inquest into the death that after a thorough investigation, fire officers were satisfied that the open fire was not the cause of the blaze which led to Faraday's death.
Oh.
A post-mortem carried out by pathologist Grace Callaghy noted that Faraday had suffered from type 2 diabetes and hypertension, but had not died of heart failure. Well, he's a big pile of ash. I mean, okay. I don't think he had a heart attack here.
If you look at these pieces of ashes here that form the shape of a heart. Oh, sorry, sir. That was me. I was drawing in the ashes. Okay. That's why it looks like a Valentine.
In September 2011, the West Galway coroner, Dr. McLaughlin, informed the inquiry into the death that he searched medical literature to determine the cause of death. The coroner referred to Professor Barnard Knight's book on forensic pathology, which states that a high number of alleged incidents of spontaneous human combustion had taken place near an open fireplace or chimney. The coroner subsequently made a statement to an inquiry. This fire was thoroughly investigated, and I'm left with the conclusion that this fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation. And that's 2011. This happened in December of 2010. That's September of 2011. That is the coroner on the coroner's report.
Modern science.
Yeah. Of course, there was a lot of backlash. A lot of people don't believe in it, right?
Right. So, you know what I found? I found the Ulster dialect has it Gardaí. And then the Connacht dialect, which is the Middle Ireland, Gardaí. like a leprechaun. Listen to it.
Farty. That did sound like a leprechaun.
And then the Munster dialect, which is
my lucky charms.
the Munster dialect is to the south. Gardaí. It sounds like a sailor. Gardaí.
I think that's you. I can't see you moving your mouth. I think that's just you doing it. You're not doing it.
Look, I'm going back here and listen to the leprechaun.
I think you're.
I've been practicing my
voice.
Ventriloquism. Listen to the guy again. You're doing perfect ventriloquism of a leprechaun saying police in Irish.
Gardaí.
Oh my God. All right, let's.
Gardaí. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's move on.
All right, man. Anyway, it's not Doherty, it's Faraday. Faraday.
Where the Gardaí is is police. The police. Gardaí. Gardaí. Okay.
All right, let's
So let's look at the explanations, right? Are you done with Faraday?
I mean, I could keep, that's pretty much it. I just found it pretty extraordinary that a coroner actually put it on someone's death report, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so let's look at the explanations. You ready for that?
I'm ready.
The first is, we've already talked about, is the Wick Effect. Most scientists dismiss the idea that humans can catch fire for no reason. Many cases involved victims who were alone, close to an open flame, such as a cigarette or a candle, and often the victims have been elderly or intoxicated and thus unable to put out the flames. Because old people can't put out flames. And then in order for I don't understand what they mean by that.
At what age do you reach that you're old and you can't put yourself out if you catch yourself on fire?
Yeah, like if it's the 1800s, it's like 27. You're over you're too old to put the fire out. In order for anything to combust, three things are required: a high heat, a source of fuel, and an oxidizing agent, which generally you think that's going to be the oxygen in the air, right?
That's air. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The human body is largely composed of water, so it's difficult to burn, I suppose. And some have suggested that the fat in the human body could act as a fuel source. And the victim's hair or clothing might act like a candle wick. So like the guy who fell with his head close to the fireplace, that could have been hair catching on fire, and then the rest of them going up.
Maybe I guess it's possible a spark could have come out of the fire.
Yeah.
But the fire investigators on the scene, the forensic fire investigators said that they didn't think the fire was connected at all. But his head was close to the fireplace, but the fire did not originate from the fireplace to him or anything like that. But I guess a spark could have popped out or something like that.
Well, then it says as the fat melts, the body would burn from the inside out, leaving the surroundings intact. I mentioned earlier that BBC TV show, that was the 1998 experiment where they took a pig body, wrapped it in a blanket, and then showed that the body burned for several hours without igniting its surroundings. This is the most popular one that I saw, the Wick Effect, as an explanation from the scientific community about what might be going on. You had mentioned acetone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've read similar things that I've read, I imagine. The British biologist and author Brian Ford has another theory for the source of the strange blazes. In a condition called ketosis, the human body produces small amounts of the flammable substance acetone, which is like a component in nail polish remover, Ford believes that when a person's sick, they may produce enough acetone to create a tiny spark, perhaps due to static electricity or something like that. The person then catches fire and begins to burn. That one seems a little weird.
Right. Ford had talked about that. He marinated some abdominal tissue from pigs in some acetone, which is highly flammable. He believes that acetone can be caused by a reaction to alcoholism, fat-free dieting, and also diabetes. I mean, it's, I guess, possible. For instance, the one lady that died that was mentally handicapped, not an alcoholic, I don't think, but maybe she had diabetes, right? You know, it could be something of the case there. I think the big controversy between whether this is real or not, or as far as spontaneous human combustion, and where most critics would argue, is that you don't just burst into flames. There has to be some kind of outside source of the fire. It's not that the human body can't burn in the right conditions, or maybe even if you do have this acetone in your system or whatever, could really get it going. I think what they're trying to say is if the conditions are right, it's rare. It's a very rare occurrence. And I think they're trying to say if the conditions are right, a human body can smolder and burn the way it does, and not damage the furniture and things around it, but it requires some source of outside ignition. I think in every case that we've talked about, it looks like there probably could have been a case of some type of, except for maybe the fishing derby guys. I'm not sure about their circumstances, but I mean, we have the older lady, the Mary Besser, was a smoker. And in fact, there's been more than one incident of a person who was a smoker this happened with.
Right. Yeah.
The Faraday.
Yeah.
He was right next to the fireplace. The lady that I started with, it could have been a spark from her father's pipe, or she was pretty close to the pilot light on the stove. So maybe something there. I don't know.
There's also a couple other things that they mentioned. One, I like to call the ball lightning and bad taco effect that you sort of alluded to earlier.
Every time I hear ball lightning, the next thing I'm ready for is a weather balloon. Or an inversion or something.
This was...
Who's pulling out the ball lightning again?
This was actually suggested by someone back in, I think, in the Reeser incident or maybe it was one that was in the 70s, that ball lightning had struck through open window, struck the person, and they had a buildup of methane in their intestines, and it caused them to go poof.
No.
So,
I mean, ball lightning, come on, man. It's like skeptics use ball lightning for everything. I mean, it's like, okay, I can see the UFO thing, but now you're going to say ball lightning causes spontaneous human combustion too. Next thing you know, somebody's going to say, I saw Bigfoot. No, you didn't. It was ball lightning.
That's ball lightning. And also, another thing that they suggest is balloons and temperature inversions may cause spontaneous human combustion.
Right.
And my favorite one was poltergeist.
Yeah.
That poltergeist might be a supernatural spirit that's angry. And then probably the one that's most likely is the last one on the list, which is a character from a Stephen King novel. Some angry little child with the ability to cause people to burst into flames.
Fire starter.
Yeah, stay away from Drew Barrymore. Yeah. Stay away from Drew. She'll kill you.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating topic. I mean, we could definitely look at some cases. I think that Mary Besser one's probably the strangest, I think. You know, where her, limbs were burnt off and things. It's just strange. It's so weird. Especially, there's a lot of pictures of it, too. There's some gruesome photos, folks, if you want to chase this one down on the internet sometime.
Yeah. The Frank Baker one is the one I just went, if a doctor's saying that the fire started on the inside and blew out, I mean, that is just weird.
Yeah. That is very strange. Well, all right, man. I think that's all I have for tonight's episode on spontaneous human combustion. You got anything else?
No, just that I'm going to maybe cut back on the drinking a little bit. Stay away from open flames. It's making me nervous.
Yeah, no kidding, man. You may just burst into flames at any moment.
I mean, but what a way to go.
Yeah. I forgot to mention this at the first of the show. We are going to take a week off, because Jimmy's going to California.
Yeah, going to California.
Yeah. I told Jimmy, I said, California is the place you ought to be. So he loaded up the truck and he moved to Beverly
Hills, that is. Swimming pools, movie stars.
Movie stars.
Yeah, that's right. We're not dating ourselves.
So, yeah, we're going to be taking a week off, a little spring break while Jimmy's on vacation. But when we come back, we are going to have extra special episode. In fact, it will be part 1 of a 2-part episode on the Roswell incident. That's right. We've been waiting to do this one, do a lot of research on it. We know it's going to take a couple of episodes to get all the way through it. You want to be sure and tune in on that. If you're one of the newer listeners, don't worry. Just download some of our older episodes and you'll feel right at home. Just download it next Sunday and be like, oh, okay. It's just like they have an episode that came out today.
Exactly.
Anyway, before we get out of here, I'd like to remind everyone, please rate and review the podcast. It helps other people find the show. Check out our webpage, CosmicSponge.com. There you can find the web store, buy you some cool t-shirts or mugs or what have you. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, look for Buy Me a Coffee. And also the new Patreon link is up there if you'd like to support the show. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram. And we are also on YouTube. To all you YouTube listeners out there, thanks. And we may be going video soon. So I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure anybody wants to actually see what I look like. They'll be like, oh my God.
They've already seen what you look like because we released that little cartoon on YouTube.
Oh, well, I actually look better in the cartoon than I do in real life, I think.
I wasn't going to say anything, but well.
That's right. Now check it out on YouTube. There's a little cartoon that Jimmy's daughter provided for us. So
yeah, I think she paid an artist friend of hers to put that together for us.
Nice. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, check it out, if nothing else. Jimmy, did I leave anything out?
Nope. As always, you nailed it.
All right. With all that being said, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll see you next week.
And Jimmy Code, keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground. We'll catch you next week.
Jimmy, put down that wine glass. You're going to explode. Oh my God, Jimmy Code just exploded.
That's not wine. That's beer mixed with acetone. Good. Man. I can paint my nails with it while I'm drinking.
All right, man. We'll see you later.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you would like to share, you can contact us using our email account at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/CosmicSponge, where you get access to exclusive content, including our Weird Wonders news and stories released every week. To explore everything Cosmic Sponge has to offer, including other ways to support the show, head on over to our website at www.cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.